Hey, stop scrolling for a second. This story might change how you see people forever. She walked into that ballroom in a plain yellow maid's uniform, surrounded by billionaires in silk and diamonds. Nobody was supposed to notice her. Nobody was supposed to remember her name. But by the end of that night, 500 people were on their feet, and one woman in a pink gown standing right beside her had gone completely pale. What that maid did in front of the richest people in the city would leave the whole room in tears. And trust me, you won't forget this one. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you belong to? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one of them. Today's story is about a woman the world tried to make invisible, a wedding that almost went perfectly for all the wrong reasons, and one act of kindness that nobody in that mansion ever expected. I promise you, this one is going to sit with you long after it ends. Let's get into it. A cardboard box, a locked door, and a stranger's kindness. This is where it all began. Maria Alvarez had learned a long time ago that life didn't hand out second chances easily. You had to fight for every single one. She was 34 years old, living in a small rented apartment on the edge of Columbus, Ohio, with her 8-year-old son Diego. Maria worked 2 jobs, mornings cleaning offices downtown, evenings as a housekeeper for a cleaning agency that sent her wherever they needed extra hands. She hadn't always lived this way. 5 years ago, she had a husband, a small house, and a life that felt steady. Then her husband, Carlos, died in a construction accident, and everything Maria thought was permanent turned out to be built on sand. She remembered the exact day the bank called about the house. She remembered packing Diego's toys into a cardboard box that used to hold oranges from the grocery store. She remembered him asking in his small voice, "Mama, are we going to be okay?" And she remembered lying to him for the first time in her life, saying, "Of course, Mijo. We're always going to be okay." Some nights, after Diego fell asleep, Maria sat at the kitchen table with bills spread out in front of her like a losing hand of cards, and she let herself cry, quietly so he wouldn't hear. But Maria was not a woman who stayed on the floor for long. She scrubbed floors with pride. She folded towels like they were art. She showed up early and stayed late, because she knew that in a world that often looked past people like her, being excellent was the only kind of proof some people would ever accept. It was through the cleaning agency that Maria was assigned, almost by accident, to the Whitfield estate, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city that belonged to one of the wealthiest families in the state. Richard Whitfield had built a real estate empire from nothing, and his son, Nathaniel Whitfield, was set to inherit it all. Nathaniel was 38, sharp-suited, soft-spoken, and, according to the tabloids, engaged to a woman named Vanessa Cole, a socialite known for her sharp tongue and sharper heels. Maria wasn't hired to work in the main house at first. She was brought in for a temporary cleaning contract during renovations, mostly staying in the guest wing, polishing floors nobody important would even walk on. She kept her head down. She did her job. She didn't expect to be noticed by anyone who mattered. But one rainy Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. Maria was mopping a hallway near the east wing when she heard a voice, small and scared, coming from behind a closed door. She paused, listening. It was a child's voice. "Please. Somebody. I'm stuck." Without thinking twice, Maria dropped her mop and rushed toward the sound. The door was locked from the outside. An old service door that led to a narrow linen closet, the kind that could snap shut if the latch was old and stiff. Inside, crying and trembling, was a little girl no older than 6, wearing a blue dress with lace at the collar. Hey, it's okay," Maria said gently, crouching down so her eyes met the child's through the small gap in the door. "I'm going to get you out." "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Chloe," the girl whimpered. "I was playing hide and seek and the door got stuck and it's dark and I want my daddy." Maria's heart clenched. She tried the handle, jammed. She looked around, spotted a bent hairpin holding up her own hair, and got to work. It took almost 10 minutes, coaxing the girl to stay calm, talking softly through the door about her own son, about how brave Chloe was being, about how heroes always start out a little scared. Finally, with a click, the door swung open. Chloe threw her arms around Maria's waist and sobbed into her uniform. Maria held her, rubbing slow circles on her back, whispering that she was safe now, that everything was okay. That's when footsteps came pounding down the hallway. "Chloe! Oh my God, Chloe!" A man rounded the corner, tall, dark-haired, dressed in a crisp gray suit despite it being a Tuesday afternoon at home. It was Nathaniel Whitfield himself, and behind him, moving more slowly in towering heels, was a striking blonde woman in a cream-colored dress, Vanessa Cole. Nathaniel dropped to his knees and pulled his daughter into his arms. "We've been looking everywhere. Are you hurt? What happened?" Chloe, still sniffling, pointed at Maria. "She saved me, Daddy. She got the door open. She talked to me so I wasn't scared." Nathaniel looked up at Maria, really looked at her, for the first time. Something in his expression shifted, like he was seeing a person instead of a uniform. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you so much." Vanessa, standing a few feet back with her arms crossed, said nothing at all. Her eyes moved over Maria's uniform, her work boots, the mop still lying on the floor down the hall, and something cold flickered behind her polished smile. Maria didn't notice it then. She was too busy making sure Chloe was okay. But that cold flicker in Vanessa's eyes was the first seed of something that would grow, slowly and quietly, over the following months. Because Vanessa Cole did not like being reminded that kindness could come from someone she considered beneath her. And she would not forget Maria Alvarez's face. Nobody knew that a simple thank you would open a door that changed everything. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected began to happen. Chloe, the youngest Whitfield, started asking for Maria by name. "Is the nice lady coming today, Daddy?" she'd ask at breakfast. "Can she read to me again?" Nathaniel, moved by his daughter's attachment and grateful beyond words for what Maria had done, spoke to the household manager. Instead of being a temporary contractor cycling through different homes, Maria was offered a permanent position, housekeeper for the Whitfield estate, with better pay, stable hours, and benefits that meant Diego could finally see a dentist without Maria calculating grocery money in her head first. Maria almost cried when she got the call. It felt like the first real piece of solid ground under her feet in 5 years. She threw herself into the work with the same quiet dedication she brought to everything. She learned the rhythms of the house, which windows caught the morning light best, how Richard Whitfield liked his study organized, how Chloe liked her stuffed rabbit placed just so on her pillow every night. She became, without anyone officially naming it, a steady and comforting presence in a house that, for all its grandeur, often felt a little cold. Nathaniel noticed the change in his daughter. Chloe laughed more. She stopped having the nightmares that used to wake her crying in the night, nightmares that had started after her mother left 2 years earlier, moving across the country with a man Chloe barely knew. Nathaniel had been trying to fill that gap ever since, working himself thin between running half the family business and being both parents at once. Maria's steady warmth was like a small, quiet miracle in his daughter's life. He began to notice other things too. The way Maria never complained, even when tasks piled up. The way she spoke to the household staff with genuine respect, remembering their birthdays, their children's names, their small struggles. The way she carried herself, not with the practiced polish of the people at his father's dinner parties, but with something realer, something that felt to Nathaniel like honesty. Vanessa noticed too, and she did not like what she saw. "You let the housekeeper eat dinner with Chloe?" she asked one evening, her voice sharp as she watched Maria clearing the kitchen table where she just helped Chloe finish her homework. "She wasn't eating dinner, Vanessa. She was helping with fractions," Nathaniel said, not looking up from his phone. "It's inappropriate. She's staff. She's kind to my daughter. That's not inappropriate. That's a relief." Vanessa said nothing more that night, But her jaw tightened, and later, alone in the guest suite she used when she stayed over, she scrolled through her phone with a familiar, simmering irritation. She had grown up with money her whole life. Old money, the kind with country club memberships and inherited silverware. She had learned early that status was maintained through distance, through knowing exactly who belonged where. And Maria, in Vanessa's mind, did not belong anywhere near the center of this family's life. It wasn't really about Maria as a person. Vanessa barely knew her. It was about what Maria represented. A version of value that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with character. And deep down, in a place Vanessa rarely let herself look at too closely, she knew that if people ever truly compared the two of them side by side, not their bank accounts but who they actually were, she might not come out ahead. So instead of examining that feeling, Vanessa did what people who are afraid of the truth often do. She looked for small ways to remind Maria, and everyone else, exactly where the lines were supposed to be drawn. Started small. Comment here. A raised eyebrow there. Can you fix your posture when you serve guests? That uniform looks wrinkled. Did you not have time to iron it? Nothing loud enough to seem cruel. Nothing Nathaniel would necessarily catch. Just enough, drop by drop, to make Maria feel smaller in a house that had started to feel, for the first time in years, like somewhere she could breathe. Maria said nothing. She had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting in the moment. She kept her head high, did her work with excellence, and went home each night to hug her son a little tighter, grateful for the paycheck, grateful for Chloe's laughter, and quietly enduring the rest. But Vanessa's wedding to Nathaniel was approaching. A grand celebration was being planned. 500 guests, the biggest social event the city had seen in years. And Vanessa had one particular request for the household staff that would, more than anything else, reveal exactly who she really was. She wanted Maria there. Not as a guest. As a server. Dressed unmistakably as what she was. So that every powerful person in that ballroom would see clearly where the help belonged. What Vanessa didn't know was that her plan to embarrass Maria would set off a chain of events no one could stop. The wedding was set for a Saturday evening in early June, at the Whitfield family's private estate, in a ballroom that had once hosted a sitting governor. Vanessa had spent nearly a year planning every detail, the flowers flown in from 3 different countries, a string quartet, a guest list that read like a who's who of the city's elite. 2 weeks before the wedding, Vanessa called a meeting with the household staff. Maria stood at the back of the small group in the servants' quarters, watching Vanessa walk the room with a clipboard, assigning roles with brisk efficiency. When she reached Maria, her smile turned thin. "You'll be working the champagne station near the east entrance. I want you specifically there, since you're already so familiar with that part of the house." There was a pointed edge to her words that Maria understood immediately, though she kept her face calm. Vanessa wanted her stationed near the entrance where every important guest would walk past, visible in uniform, unmistakably placed. It wasn't about efficient staffing. It was a message. Maria simply nodded. Of course. Later that week, Nathaniel found Maria in the kitchen, going over the wedding day schedule. "You don't have to work that night if it makes you uncomfortable," he said quietly, watching her carefully. "I can have someone else cover it." Maria looked up at him, surprised he'd even considered it. "It's all right, Mr. Whitfield. It's my job." "Nathaniel," he corrected gently. "And Maria, you've done more for this family than you know. You don't have to prove anything." She managed a small smile, though something in his words stayed with her longer than she expected. The night of the wedding arrived, lit up like something out of a dream. Chandeliers cast golden light across 500 guests in tuxedos and gowns that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. Vanessa, in a shimmering pink gown with a train that trailed behind her like liquid silk, moved through the crowd like she owned every square inch of it, because in every way that mattered to her, she believed she did. Maria stood at her station near the east entrance exactly as instructed, pouring champagne with steady hands, offering warm smiles to guests who mostly looked straight through her, the way people sometimes do with anyone in a uniform. She was used to it. It didn't sting the way it once might have. Then, just after the ceremony, as guests filtered into the reception, something happened that no one, least of all Vanessa, had planned for. An elderly woman near the champagne station suddenly gasped and clutched her chest, stumbling. Panic rippled outward as people nearby backed away, unsure what was happening. It was Eleanor Winthrop, one of the most respected philanthropists in the state, 91 years old, and beloved across the city for the children's hospital wing that bore her family's name. Maria didn't hesitate. She set down the champagne bottle, rushed forward, and caught Eleanor before she could fall. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Sit down slowly right here." Her voice was calm, practiced, the same steady tone she'd once used to calm a frightened little girl locked in a closet. She checked Eleanor's pulse, loosened the collar of her dress, and called out clearly over the rising murmur of alarmed guests. "Someone call 911 now. She may be having a cardiac event. Everyone please step back and give her air." For the next several minutes, while panicked guests stood frozen and a few well-dressed men fumbled uselessly with their phones, Maria stayed exactly where she was needed, monitoring Eleanor's breathing, keeping her calm, keeping her talking, applying everything she'd learned years ago in a first aid course she'd taken while working at a nursing home, back before Diego was born. By the time paramedics arrived 8 minutes later, Eleanor was stable, conscious, and, remarkably, smiling faintly up at the woman who had stayed by her side the entire time. "You saved my life," Eleanor said softly, gripping Maria's hand as the paramedics prepared to move her. "I just did what anyone would do, ma'am," Maria said. "No," Eleanor said, her voice suddenly sharp with clarity despite her ordeal. "Not anyone. You." The ballroom, which had gone eerily silent during the emergency, remained quiet even after the paramedics wheeled Eleanor away, stable and already insisting she'd be back for the reception's dessert course. 500 of the city's most powerful people stood frozen, processing what they had just witnessed. A woman in a maid's uniform, the one many of them hadn't even bothered to look at twice all evening, had just saved the life of one of the most beloved figures in their community, with more composure and skill than half the room could have managed. Nathaniel, who had rushed over the moment he heard the commotion, stood staring at Maria with an expression that mixed awe, gratitude, and something else. Something that had been quietly building in him for months and had just been thrown into sharp, undeniable focus. And Vanessa, standing at the edge of the crowd in her shimmering pink gown, felt every eye in the room that had once been on her slowly, unmistakably, shift toward someone else entirely. What Vanessa said next, in front of everyone, would be the moment she could never take back. The silence stretched a beat too long, and into that silence, Vanessa did something that would define the rest of the evening, and in many ways the rest of her life. She stepped forward, chin lifted, and forced a bright smile onto her face, the kind she'd practiced in mirrors since childhood for moments exactly like this. Moments where she needed to seize control of a room. "Well," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed ballroom, "I suppose that's what we pay the help for. Crisis management included, apparently." She let out a short, brittle laugh, glancing around for others to join her. No one laughed. "I mean really," Vanessa continued, filling the uncomfortable silence with more words, "the way people do when they sense they've made a mistake but don't yet know how to stop. It's sweet, I suppose. Though I do hope someone's going to properly clean the champagne she spilled." She gestured vaguely toward the small puddle near the overturned bottle Maria had set down in her rush to help Eleanor. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone near the back murmured something Vanessa couldn't quite hear, but the tone was unmistakable. Disapproval. Maria, still kneeling by the chair where Eleanor had been sitting, slowly stood, brushing off her uniform with quiet dignity. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes wasn't anger. It was something steadier, something that had clearly weathered far worse than one woman's cruelty in a ballroom. It was Richard Whitfield, Nathaniel's father, who broke the silence next. He was 72 years old, a man who had built his fortune from nothing, starting as a construction worker before he ever owned a single building. He walked forward slowly, his cane tapping against the marble floor, and stopped directly in front of Maria. "Young lady," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that decades of respect had earned him. "What is your name?" "Maria, sir. Maria Alvarez." "Maria Alvarez," Richard repeated, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Do you know who that woman is that you just saved?" "I know she needed help," Maria said simply. "That's all that mattered to me." Richard turned to face the room, 500 guests watching him with rapt attention. "That woman is Eleanor Winthrop. She funded the wing of St. Mary's Children's Hospital where my late wife spent her final 6 weeks receiving care that money alone could never have bought, the kind of care built on compassion. And tonight, in this room full of people who call ourselves the most important people in this city, it was a maid, someone half of you didn't even bother to make eye contact with tonight, who knew exactly what to do when it mattered most." He turned back to Maria, his eyes glistening slightly. 5 months ago, my granddaughter got trapped in a linen closet in my son's house. My son told me what you did that day, how you talked her through her fear until you got her out. I didn't think much of it at the time. Kindness like that, I assumed, was common. Tonight I'm starting to understand it isn't common at all. It's rare. And it deserves to be seen. The room had gone utterly still, every guest hanging on his words. Richard turned toward Vanessa, his expression cooling considerably. "And you, young lady, just called an act of heroism crisis management, and complained about spilled champagne. I think that tells this room everything it needs to know about the difference between the two women standing here tonight." Vanessa's face went through several shades of pale, her mouth opening and closing without any words coming out. The bright, practiced smile had completely collapsed. Nathaniel stepped forward then, and the look on his face was one Vanessa had never seen directed at her before, a kind of clarity, as if a fog he'd been standing in for years had suddenly, completely lifted. "Vanessa," he said quietly, though the room was silent enough that everyone heard it anyway, "I think we need to talk. Not here. But soon." Vanessa's carefully constructed evening, the wedding she'd spent a year planning down to the smallest floral detail, was unraveling in real time, in front of everyone whose respect she'd spent her entire life trying to earn. And somewhere in the back of the ballroom, Chloe, who had slipped away from her nanny to see what the commotion was about, pushed through the crowd of adult legs until she reached the front. She looked up and saw Maria standing there, and without a moment's hesitation, ran forward and wrapped her arms tightly around Maria's waist. "That's my friend," Chloe announced to the entire ballroom, her small voice somehow carrying more truth than anything else said that night. "She's the bravest person I know." The room, which had been holding its breath, finally exhaled into applause. It started with a few hands near the front, then spread, gathering momentum, until all 500 guests were on their feet, clapping for a woman in a yellow uniform who, 20 minutes earlier, most of them hadn't even noticed was in the room. What happened after the applause faded would change Maria's life forever, but not in the way anyone expected. Eleanor Winthrop, it turned out, refused to be left out of her own dramatic rescue's aftermath. 2 days after the wedding, still recovering but insistent on visitors, she requested that Maria come see her at her home, a stately but understated house on the north side of the city, filled with photographs of children from the hospital wing she'd funded for over 30 years. Maria arrived nervous, unsure what to expect, Diego's small hand in hers because she hadn't been able to arrange childcare on short notice. Eleanor, propped up on pillows but clearly recovering well, brightened the moment she saw them. "There she is," Eleanor said warmly. "And who is this handsome young man?" "This is my son Diego," Maria said. Eleanor spent the better part of an hour talking with them, asking Diego about school, asking Maria about her life, listening in a way that felt entirely different from the polite, distracted attention Maria was used to receiving in wealthy households. Eleanor Winthrop, despite her fortune, had never forgotten what it felt like to be truly listened to, and she made sure to offer that same gift to everyone she met. Near the end of the visit, Eleanor grew serious. "Maria, I've been thinking about what to do to properly thank you, and I want to be honest with you. Money alone never feels like enough for a moment like the one you gave me. But I also know that the kind of stability you deserve isn't something a single conversation can hand you either. So I'd like to do two things if you'll let me." She explained that she wanted to fund Diego's education completely, from that point through college, no matter where his interests eventually led him. And she wanted to offer Maria something else entirely, a full scholarship and paid training program through the children's hospital wing she funded, to become a certified nursing assistant, with a guaranteed position waiting for her once she completed it, at a salary that would finally, truly, lift her and Diego out of the constant financial strain that had shadowed them since Carlos's death. Maria sat frozen for a long moment, tears welling in her eyes. "Mrs. Winthrop, I can't accept something like this just for." "You're not accepting charity," Eleanor said firmly, cutting her off with the gentle authority of a woman who had spent decades getting exactly what she believed was right. "You're accepting an opportunity that you've already proven, beyond any doubt, that you deserve. I've watched a lot of people move through my life claiming to have good character. Very few of them prove it the way you did, without a second's hesitation, expecting nothing in return. That's not something I take lightly. Let me do this, please." Maria, holding Diego close to her side, finally nodded through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Meanwhile, across the city, Nathaniel Whitfield's engagement to Vanessa Cole officially ended within the week. It wasn't just the wedding scene, though that had certainly been the breaking point everyone could see. In the days that followed, as Nathaniel sat with the full weight of everything, he realized the wedding hadn't revealed a new side of Vanessa. It had simply made undeniable something he'd been quietly sensing for a long time and choosing not to look at directly. The small comments, the subtle coldness toward staff, the way she treated kindness as a weakness rather than a strength. Vanessa, for her part, left the city not long after, moving to New York to start fresh, as she told the small circle of friends who still spoke to her. The story of the wedding had spread quickly through their social circle, not through gossip alone, but because 500 witnesses had seen, with their own eyes, exactly who she was in the moment it mattered most. Nathaniel, meanwhile, found himself thinking about Maria constantly in the weeks that followed, not out of guilt or obligation, but because he kept noticing more and more clearly the quiet strength she carried, the warmth she brought into every room, the way his daughter had healed and blossomed under her care in ways nothing else had managed in 2 long years. But there was still one thing Maria didn't know. Something Nathaniel had been keeping from her since the night of the wedding, something that would become the final, quiet twist in a story that had already changed so much. What Nathaniel had been hiding wasn't a secret meant to hurt anyone. It was one meant to heal something broken for good. 3 months passed. Maria had begun her nursing assistant training program at St. Mary's, balancing early morning classes with her ongoing work at the Whitfield estate, which Nathaniel had insisted she keep for as long as she wanted it, at whatever schedule worked for her life. Diego had started at a new school, funded fully by Eleanor's generosity, and for the first time since Carlos's death, Maria found herself sleeping through the night without the familiar tight knot of financial anxiety sitting in her chest. Chloe, now 7, had taken to calling Maria her second best friend right after Daddy, which always made Nathaniel laugh in a way that had grown more frequent since the wedding that never quite finished happening. It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon, while Maria was helping Chloe with a puzzle in the sunroom, that Nathaniel finally worked up the courage to tell her what he'd been holding on to. "Maria, can I talk to you for a minute?" She looked up, noticing the nervousness in his voice that she hadn't heard from him before. "Of course." He sat down across from her, glancing briefly at Chloe, who was fully absorbed in fitting puzzle pieces together and paying no attention to the adults nearby. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I'm not telling you this because I expect anything from you. I think you deserve to know the truth." Maria's heart quickened slightly, unsure what was coming. "The day my father spoke at the wedding about my daughter getting locked in that closet," Nathaniel began. "He wasn't just telling that story to embarrass Vanessa, though I know it felt that way in the moment. He told me afterward that EDH actually looked into your file when I first mentioned hiring you permanently. He does that with anyone new in the family's life. Old habit from building a company from nothing. He found out about your husband, about everything you and Diego went through after." Maria stiffened slightly, unsure where this was going. "He came to me privately before the wedding even happened, and told me something I've been sitting with ever since," Nathaniel continued. He said, "Nathaniel, you've spent 2 years trying to fill a hole in Chloe's life with the wrong kind of person. Pay attention to who's actually filling it right now, quietly, without asking for anything." Maria felt her breath catch. "I didn't understand what he meant at first," Nathaniel admitted. "Or maybe I understood it and wasn't ready to admit it. But watching you that night at the wedding, the way you handled everything with more grace than anyone else in that entire ballroom, it clarified something I think I'd been feeling for a long time and was too afraid, or too loyal to the wrong commitment to acknowledge." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I'm not asking you for anything, Maria. I know our situation is complicated. You work in this house and I never ever want you to feel pressured by that, or like your job here depends on anything beyond exactly what it's always depended on, your incredible work and Chloe's happiness. But I needed you to know that what you've brought into this house, into my daughter's life and honestly into mine, has meant more than I think I ever properly said. And if there's ever a version of this conversation you'd want to have outside of any of that, I'd like that very much." Maria sat quietly for a long moment, watching Chloe happily hum to herself over her puzzle, watching Nathaniel's nervous, honest, unguarded expression, so different from the polished composure she'd grown used to seeing on him. "I've spent 5 years," Maria said slowly, "trying to make sure nobody ever saw me as someone who needed anything. Just someone who could give. Safer that way. It hurts less." "I know," Nathaniel said softly. "But I think," Maria continued, her voice steadying, "I've been so busy being strong for everyone else that I forgot it's okay to let someone be there for me too." Nathaniel reached across the small space between them, not pulling her toward anything, just offering his hand, open, patient. "Take whatever time you need. I meant what I said. There's no pressure here. Just an open door whenever you're ready to walk through it." Maria looked at his hand for a long moment, then finally, gently, placed hers in it. Outside, the late afternoon sun spilled gold across the sunroom floor, catching the edges of Chloe's puzzle pieces, catching the quiet, hopeful look passing between two people who had both, in their own ways, spent years being strong for everyone but themselves. Maria Alvarez never set out to be a hero. She never set out to change anyone's life, least of all her own. She simply chose again and again, in small moments and large ones, to be kind, to show up fully, and to treat every single person she met, whether a frightened little girl behind a locked door or a fragile elderly woman in a crowded ballroom, as someone who mattered. And in the end, that's what the whole story really comes down to. Not wealth. Not status. Not the dress you wear into a room or the title stitched onto your uniform. What matters, in the moments that truly count, is who you choose to be when no one is asking anything of you at all. If this story touched your heart even a little tonight, I want you to remember Maria. And remember that kindness, real kindness, the quiet, consistent, ask for nothing in return kind, is never wasted. It always finds its way back around. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like this video. It truly helps this channel more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like more stories just like this one. And if there's someone in your life who could use a little reminder tonight that kindness always matters, please share this with them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.